Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Electrification Coalition and fourth CFI Award webinar. If you'll recall, back in April of 2023, we hosted a webinar around the Charging and Fueling Infrastructure Grant announcement, which was put out to supplement the NEVI build out to build a robust charging network, both along those alternative fuel corridors and in communities. And earlier this month, the long-awaited CFI awards were announced, awarding $623 million to begin meeting those charging gaps in those communities and alternative fuel corridors. So today we're going to deep dive into what those awards tell us about infrastructure build-out, as well as what that can tell us about future rounds of CFI. And a reminder throughout this presentation to drop your questions in the Q&A, and we will do our best to answer them or direct them to where they need to go to get answered. So a little bit about the organizations running this. If you're new here, the Electrification Coalition is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization developing strategies to facilitate widespread adoption of EVs, as well as overcoming economic, public health, and national security challenges to get charging deployed. So that's a little bit about the EC, and our sister organization, SAFE, is also featured on here with a similar mission. Additionally, a little bit about Fourth. Fourth is a nonprofit striving for a world where clean and equitable transportation systems move everything and everyone. So their mission is to electrify transportation by bringing people together to create solutions that reduce pollution and barriers to access through work focused on EVs, charging, emerging modes, partnerships, and policy. So with that about us, we're going to move into our agenda for today. So we'll cover an overview of the projects awarded, some of the major trends we saw of the last round, and what that can mean for what the Joint Office would be potentially looking for in round two. We have notes and observations from our experts, both at EC and Fourth. So remember to send those questions through the Q&A, and we'll do our best to answer those. So with that, I'll hand it over to Brandt for a CFI round one recap. Brandt's our program manager focused on infrastructure and federal funding, and he has years of expertise in EV and EVSC education, awareness, and development, both with the EC and at its former role at the Metropolitan Energy Center and Kansas City Regional Clean Cities Coalition. So Brandt, take it away.
Thank you, Alyssa. And thank you for having us today. I'm really excited to be talking about CFI. It is finally here. We finally have the awards. It's been long awaited, and we are excited to talk to you about it today. Appreciate everyone joining the call. So I really just, for anyone who's new to CFI, I really want to go back to just the basics of where this all came from. It's part of the bipartisan infrastructure law, the $7.5 billion devoted to EV infrastructure. Of that $7.5 billion, $5 billion went to NEVI, and then the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Grant, and then $2.5 billion went to the Charging and Fueling and Infrastructure Grant, which you can see in the lower right-hand corner of this slide. As you can also see in the lower, you can see in the lower half of this slide, it was divided into community and corridor buckets. And so we'll be diving into a little bit of what that looked like as the awards came out. Okay, so for the breakdown of the awarded of the projects, well, we knew that there was a variety of eligible applicants, and there's a variety of eligible projects that the Joint Office wanted to see with these awards. And so you can kind of see what they awarded based on the project descriptions of the awards that we can see. There was priority areas in multi-unit dwellings. There was priority areas in disadvantaged and justice for the community areas. It was one of the priorities, the 5 priority areas that were illustrated in the CFI NOFO. And so as you can see, the major takeaway here is disadvantaged communities and medium and heavy duty corridors were greatly rewarded for their efforts in their applications. We also saw rural areas and multimodal focus being a priority area. Those were talked about in the NOFO as potential places where we should be focusing our efforts on in our application process. Sorry, there we go. I'm having a little trouble with the clicker. Okay. Oh boy. All right, sorry about that. Okay, so there was 47 awards across 24 states and territories with varying amounts. As we talked about, there's the community portion of it and the corridor portion of it. Originally, I wanted to show a graph or a diagram of all the awarded projects, but what made more sense to me was actually to do it by the different types. So this is what you see in this graph below is the community type. Um, the community had 36 awarded based on what the press release said. When I go into the FHWA website, I actually saw 35. So if you do see a discrepancy in the number of projects awarded, that's the reason why. So I have 35 projects, community projects across the awardee types. We do know that in the community, there is a minimum of $500,000 for the grant award, and there is a maximum of $15 million. In the corridor grant, there is a minimum of $1 million, and there's an ultimate maximum of unlimited. So we saw in corridor that the maximum award was $70 million. We also saw in the corridor that there's 2 million. And so there was a much broader spectrum in terms of the amount awarded in corridor, but I did want to focus on community because I do think it outlines maybe something that we should be thinking about as we move into round 2 of funding. As I said, the original minimum amount was $500,000. We had 3 awardees get that $500,000 amount, but we also saw that we had a high volume of awards that were at that upper precipice of $15 million. Between 13 million and $15 million, there was 13 different applications that won the awards. So when we're thinking about this, it is okay to have an award, or sorry, having a proposal that reached both ends of the spectrum in terms of the minimum and maximum awards. But we do see that the community awards that were awarded had a higher amount of funding attached to it. And so what does that actually mean going forward? Well, as we saw in a lot of the awards, the CFI award is to do a regional uptake of electrification. So if you're just a city or a rural area working on adding EV implementation into your project scope, maybe expand that a little bit more, maybe bring in more project partners, because that will allow you to bump up your total volume of electric vehicle chargers, which will make your project a little bit more bountiful in terms of the number of EV charging stations, and then therefore the price of it. And then maybe you will have a more comprehensive and stronger effort going into the actual proposal where you might have a better chance of winning. And I think now we will talk, I will have Alyssa come back on and introduce Matt, who is a colleague of mine.
Thanks, Brandt. Yeah, great presentation. And we're going to move into Matt's portion now. So Matt is our Director of Technical Services at the EC. He's been leading the charge on all things federal funding and technical assistance for years, and has been working in the EV space since 2012 on various projects in Ohio and beyond, like Smart Columbus. So Matt will be covering the overall trends we saw and from who was awarded, and then we'll use those trends to shape our predictions for successful applications in round 2. So Matt, take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Alyssa. And just to dig a little bit deeper to Brandt's setup, which really helps set the table nicely. Indeed, we saw a lot of key takeaways and considerations from awarded projects. If anything, as we're really slicing and dicing through a lot of the announced application data, working with awarded projects, just trying to glean more insight, there's a lot of charts, a lot of ways we can render it to Brandt's point. So more than happy to share even more on that insight as follow-up to this. But some core takeaways, as really boiling it down, which we'll be going through more in the next section on prepping for CFI round 2. But to Brandt's point, one thing right off the bat, while there was a significant portion of awarded applications that had one city as the named prime applicant, or a city that was essentially inferred as where the area of delivery would be. And that is to say, there's a little bit of a conservative measure there, as there's most likely other neighboring communities that would also be included in the project. We did also see a significant portion of multi-city applications that were also awarded, especially some that far exceeded the 3 to 5 range. So we even saw some that were 15 plus cities affected. And that really did seem to drive increased success as well as award amount, to Brandt's point. At the end of the day, it really does speak to the regional focus of the CFI grant, thinking not just about how do you put charging in a given city or municipality, but a broader regional scope. Another key thing that we also saw coming off of this was project awards were evenly split between community and corridor applications. To that introductory graph that breaks it down, community programming that was focused on often level 2 or slower style charging for more point destinations within the community. And then the corridor program allowed for DC fast charging or other types of charging, such as medium and heavy duty along interstates and high throughput areas, or even aligning with the alternative fuel corridors from the NEVI program. So overall, we actually saw an even split. If you do look at the exact charger count, it was more heavily tilted towards level 2 charging, but definitely exciting and encouraging to see a lot of different project types that were ultimately awarded, which does point to the factor of building a competent and competitive project should always be your driving priority, not so much worrying about which are the different elements and specific key themes we should be playing to. To move then into the next slide here. Oh, sorry, jumped one over. Some other key things for consideration that we also saw coming through, and I even put this in both, it was a category that we expected to see, but it was really exciting to actually see it really come to fruition, was the thinking outside of the box on lead applicants. Fourth and EC both had the pleasure and opportunity to work with many applicants, both folks that did go through a final application or even just looking at a CFI application. Many cities faced significant bandwidth constraint, quite simply not having a grant writer or team that they could dedicate in a quick 3-month turnaround for writing a competitive application. So it was exciting to see lead applicants that were counties, public authorities. We even saw some tribal nations, municipal utilities. The gamut is quite broad, even states that were applying on behalf of specific regions or an entire state application. So this was really exciting to see, and it really helped drive that regionality approach, even more to the point of by working with another prime partner, that can be a path forward where otherwise there might be failure or just inability to get a competitive application together, but also that can open up the regionality and allow for you to focus on a broader area and focus. Another good core element to this, as example, was working with municipal planning organizations and councils of government, MPOs and COGs, which are a great example of being able to work in that regional focus, something that is able to transcend any one municipality or county. And also, too, the variety in project size and scope really did show room for all approaches. There was some concern and commiseration on if only large applications would be awarded or large city or metropolitan regions would be awarded. But I'm proud to report and glad to report that that really wasn't the case, or at least some were awarded, but we also saw award in other rural and underserved areas of the nation that wouldn't immediately come to mind. It really does drive home that moment of thinking about what level of charging and engagement is needed in your specific context, and really writing to that rather than worrying about competing with the larger cities such as Los Angeles, New York, Atlanta, and really thinking about what speaks more to your community need. So with that, we'll go into the prepping for round 2. So I'll hand it back to Alyssa to introduce our next speaker.
Thank you, Matt. Now we'll apply what these trends showed us to predictions for successful applications in round 2. So we really dove into some of the things that weren't necessarily clear to you at face value when you look at those lists of applicants, but as you see those awards and those trends that we laid out, we hopefully can use those to guide successful applications for round 2. So for this discussion, Brandt will be joined by Plein, the Director of Development and Communications at Forth, and they'll be taking a closer look at those key application elements for round 2. So Kat leads the team responsible for marketing and communications, events, business development, fundraising, and strategic partnerships for Forth. And with over 15 years of experience growing teams in nonprofit and corporate organizations, Kat's well equipped to get you ready for round 2. So Kat, would love to hear your observations from round 1 before we dive into you and Brandt's round 2 prep.
Thank you so much for having us. Thank you to the Electrification Coalition for all the work you've done with technical assistance and the in-depth analysis of these awards. Maybe just to put a bow on it, because I thought all of those insights were incredibly valuable. It's just a reminder. I know there's a lot of applications that went out. I think Brandt will touch on the actual number, right? But this is the first wave of over $2 billion in funding. So if you and your community did not receive an award this year, apply again. And more than that, there are other ways that you can get a charging program funded. You can explore other grants available from the Department of Agriculture, from EPA, your local utilities, and also at your state level. So just wanted to let folks know that, again, first wave in general, and there are other ways to get that funding. So general takeaway there for me. And we'll pass it over, I think, for Brandt to get us ready for what we should be thinking about in round 2.
Yeah, as Kat alluded to, we had no idea what to expect from round 1 of CFI. We knew that it was happening. We knew it was coming in the spring of 2023, but we didn't know how it was going to be written. And so a lot of us had a lot of questions going into the NOFO stage. And even once we dove into it, which was 64 pages long, I think, we still had a lot of questions to it. So much that there was a question and answer, or a question and answer that was submitted to us from the FHWA because there were so many questions. I don't think that was necessarily in the cards when they initially put out the NOFO, but because people had so many great questions, they decided to put one out. And with that, they extended the deadline of round 1 of CFI funding, which, as you can see, we expect the predicted release to be in the spring or summer of 2024. As I think Alyssa mentioned, it was in March of last year. We don't know because this was a little bit delayed in terms of the awards. There is an expectation that it might not be out annually, as in March of 2024, but we do expect it to come out in the spring or summer of 2024. With that round of funding, we expect it to be $500 million. So the fiscal year 2022 and 23 was $700 million. That's what was awarded this go around. Although I did see in the comments that there was 620, or what was the lack of accounting for the 623 million that were awarded in the round 1? Why didn't we see the full 700? I don't have an answer for that. I wish I did. But we do expect $500 million to be allocated for this round of funding. With those applications, we saw a lot of them, and I think that's probably why we have seen this the extension of when we thought the awards were going to come out. Over 600 applications were submitted for round 1. That is a ton of applications, and that's a ton of things to go through. For all the reviewers, I think they had to add reviewers into their normal amount, just because there was that many applications that they had to go through. We had applications from every single state in Puerto Rico. There is obviously an appetite for this. We see it with the number of applications. We see it from every state. We see it in our numbers. This is one of our most highly joined and attended webinars that we've had, and our previous webinar on CFI was our highest before then. So CFI is definitely something that people are interested in, and that's why we are here to try and give you as a competitive advantage as possible, because of all the things that we're seeing on the Electrification Coalition's end when we are working with cities one-on-one, or eligible applicants one-on-one, and the same thing goes for Fourth. When we saw the awards come out, we couldn't help but notice that there was a strong affinity for awards to have rural engagement. I know in the NOFO it said that they wanted to have like a 50-50 split. We saw a lot of applications have a rural component to it. We also saw disadvantaged communities as awarded significantly. That makes a ton of sense because there was an environmental justice component to it. Obviously with EJ40, that is going to be a priority area for the Joint Office and this administration. We also saw that there was an emphasis on workforce development and community engagement. If you recall, workforce development was the number 4 topic area that needed to be addressed in your applications, and community engagement was a big part of that. And I think Kat will probably go into that a little bit more, but we have plenty to talk about on community engagement. So now that we have the awards for round 1, let's look at round 2. I mean, we've already talked about it. Everyone who's put in an application for round 1, you have a great starting point. For those who don't, now's the time to start. And so we want, and what we need to do is really talk to potential partners. We talked about how we may want to be expanding some of our project scope in terms of getting more money in that application. Talk to your partners right now, because we know that it's going to come out in the spring or summer of 2024. We don't know when that is, but why wait then only to have a 2-month window, which is what the window was for the last round of funding? Let's do it now, so we're ready to go, we're prepared. So who can you talk to? Well, you need to talk to your utilities. You need to talk to your neighbor municipalities. You can talk to your MPOs, which is an eligible applicant. You can talk to your state who are eligible applicants and see if there's anybody that they've heard of that want to maybe possibly join in on a application. You can also talk to site hosts, places where they really want this charging to go. I think one of the things that we, both Fourth and Electrification Coalition, would really like to emphasize is knowing where you think these charger stations are going. There was an emphasis in the NOFO of having site locations identified. I hope that, when you were filling out your application, you got that same sense of feeling, because we know that those applications that were awarded had identification of charging locations in their application. When you do that, you need to make sure that you can use different tools that they have. We want to make sure that the existing infrastructure, if you want to build out or expand upon what you've already got in your city or your region, you can certainly do that. An eligible project was to upgrade if you wanted to. In certain instances, not in every instance, but in certain instances, you could upgrade what you have for level 2 or DC fast charging. Figure out where those gaps are in your region, and really start to use some of the tools and resources that are out there in order to do that. We really believe that knowing exactly where you're going knowing where your charging stations are going to go is going to go a long way to the success of an application. What you can do also, we have an idea of what the NOFO looks like. In 2023, when this first came out, we had no idea what this NOFO was going to look like. Again, I think it's 64 pages. Really important to go through that and marrying it with the Title 23 guidelines that we have in place. I also alluded to that question and answer document. I think it's 20 questions. I think a lot of those questions that people may have had that prevented them from putting an application in, or maybe they didn't feel like they had enough time. We have some answers to the questions that you may already have that were missing in the 2023 NOFO. The anticipation is that the NOFO is not going to change too much. Of course, there's always going to be things that can change in a NOFO, but we really think that they set a strong basis for what the CFI program is going to look like. So, it's really important that you look at the NOFO now so that you know what the differences between the 2023 and 2024 are moving ahead. There's also some things that we know that you can do ahead of time without even knowing what the CFI grant is all about. No matter what, if you're doing federal funding opportunity, you need a SAM account. SAM accounts can be a little complicated, but at the same time, there's something that has to be done, and so let's get it done right now. You also need an EIN number. A part of the application for the NOFO was supplemental paperwork that included the SF-424. Get yourself familiar with it. You don't have to necessarily write it up right away. You don't have to necessarily write your budget right away, but know some of the things that you're going to have to be putting in there so that when you come around to it, when you need to get into the nitty-gritty and actually submit that application, you're not scrambling, figuring out what kind of paperwork do I need, what kind of things do I need to add in order to make this a competitive grant. Tools and resources are obviously a key figure as well. Fourth and Electrification Coalition, along with many others, have tools and resources that you can use that are on our websites. Please take advantage of them. In addition, the NOFO had a few tools and resources that you can use and you should use as you move forward with your application. Whenever a federal funding opportunity comes out, oftentimes you will see tools and resources that they do mention in it. We strongly encourage that you use those same tools and resources. Different departments, so like Department of Energy versus Department of Agriculture, they do have some slight variations in some of the resources that they have. Make sure you're using the correct department's tools and resources that they have available for you. You can look at the Joint Office. Joint Office has a ton of tools and resources as well. There's a lot of help out there, and the Electrification Coalition and the Fourth are a great way to start figuring out exactly how to start an application. Continue your education on it. Again, reach out to Fourth and EC for technical assistance. We were able to work with a myriad of applicants throughout the process, whether it be just to ask one-on-one questions, whether to go with general themes, whether they are fit to apply for it. If you have the feeling that you want to apply for this, we have the resources available to make that a solution for you. If you've already applied before, we've heard that just because you applied doesn't mean you had a bad application. In many parts, there were strong applications that they couldn't just necessarily do multiple within the same region or in the same city. Just because you didn't win this time doesn't mean that you're not going to win the next time. And we're willing to work with you on how to enhance and make your application stronger. See, and then of course there's workshops. I think Fourth has a few workshops on CFI that we'll probably get into, and we have online and in-person engagements. We will work with you in whatever way possible that we can. If you want to do it via email, we can do that. If you want to do it with a 15-minute call, sure, let's do that as well. We are there for you as a resource, and we would love to be a part of your application if we can. Kat, take it away.
All right, Brandt. Woo, I'm like ready to go now for CFI round 2 after that one. But really, thank you to you and to the entire Electrification Coalition for the opportunity to join forces today. Telling your story through a grant narrative is critical to get funding into communities. And I really want to acknowledge that it can be challenging and resource intensive just to apply. So hopefully some of the advice that we're giving today and the resources that we'll leave you with can help lighten the load. Given the equity and community benefits found under the community program, the general advice you'll hear from me will mostly apply to the community grants, but a few quick notes about corridor, if that's where you're thinking of going. One, focus on things that NEVI formula funds won't fund, so medium, heavy duty, urban gaps, things like that. And in those cases, think about how to make that charging useful to local residents and underserved communities, not just long distance travelers. It's a better business model and it's better for equity. And now a few points of emphasis on the community program. First, let's center the people and not technology. If we're applying for funding for charging infrastructure, as Brandt noted, yes, we need to communicate that we understand the technology, permitting, and specifications for sites. And we also need to showcase that the selected locations for the technology actually benefit those that will need it, and that we're considering any potential harm. So under last year's CFI NOFO, federal priorities for the community program were in rural areas, low and moderate income neighborhoods, communities with low ratios of private parking spaces, and communities with high ratios of multifamily dwellings. So proposal narratives, as we look forward to round two of CFI, should highlight how charging will benefit residents and community members with the most barriers to access. Again, these are folks who are renters, live in multifamily housing, folks who live in rural communities, and those who only have on-street parking. And sometimes that means embracing that slower, cheaper charging at work or home may benefit folks more than fast charging does. And then when we do focus on fast charging, again, we really need to think about how to make it accessible to local users, not just long distance road trippers. And for example, if you wanted to think about a model, it could mean that there is safe, affordable, subscription-based charging available for folks like commercial gig drivers who depend on it the most. Next to consider, provide community benefits and ideally multiple benefits. In grant proposals, we need to explain these multiple benefits. So for example, if you're thinking of proposing charging at multifamily housing, we should also consider how we can increase access to electric mobility. And one of the most effective ways to increase EV awareness and adoption is to ensure that folks have an opportunity to experience the technology firsthand alongside trusted community members, and that is key, in a brand neutral setting. So practically in your narrative, that could look like making sure you're offering ride and drive education events and in partnership with local community-based organizations. Benefits could also potentially be scaled to include shared mobility like electric car or other shared mobility programs. So just to underscore this, if we only focus on the technology and forego considering the community benefits, we not only miss the federal mandate that 40% of the benefits of the CFI program go to disadvantaged communities, we can also fuel displacement concerns from residents. So, and then along the way, Brandt touched on this earlier about building broad partnerships, and I want to heavily underline his point. And actually a lot of his points, just heavy underline. I was emphatically nodding a lot of that section. Partnerships are critical to the success of our work. Narratives are stronger when we have diverse perspectives, especially those coming from the community influencing the work. So partnerships take time, adequate resources, and mutual commitments on what we're doing together. In telling the story then, communicating the importance of the partnerships for the program is absolutely key. So be clear about the roles for each partner and highlight their strengths. So in summary, partnerships require resources and mutual commitments. Move at the speed of trust and start now. Finally, in the proposal, prioritize meaningful public engagement and educational and community engagement activities. Brandt touched on this previously. We'll go a little more deeper on this on the next slide. Right. So for programs to be effective, robust public engagement that gathers input and supports strategy needs to be built upfront. Again, upfront. These are things we could be doing right now. Our team at Fourth believes that the strategy will be more effective if it centers the experiences and needs of communities that have been historically underserved and harmed by discriminatory transportation decisions. Also want to note, USDOT has a full definition about what meaningful public involvement means. They say it's a process that proactively seeks full representation from the community, considers public comments and feedback, and incorporates that feedback into a project, a program, or a plan when possible. So this really is encouraging early and continuous public involvement and brings diverse viewpoints and values into the decision-making process. So it's also really, really important to underscore last year's CFI NOFO provided guidance on how community engagement was an eligible cost under the community program. And on the slide, I think it says specifically what you can do up to 5% of the grant costs. They also noted in the NOFO language around meaningful public engagement. So there are many, how do you do this? There's a lot of ways to do community engagement and that will also determine the time and the resources needed. Some key things that should be communicated in the proposals include what the approach is. So for example, you could consider neighborhood level tabling in partnership with local community-based organizations. You could think about listening sessions and focus groups, statewide webinars if you want to make sure you're bringing all perspectives across the state together in a group application, and community-based needs assessments. And finally, when we do this work, just a reminder, we need to compensate community members and community-based organizations for their time and think about providing additional benefits like providing food and childcare. So one other quick note about thinking what we can do now. While we wait for the next round of CFI to come out, and as Brandt said, we're thinking it's like spring, early summer. One thing that you could be doing right now is finding other funds for this engagement work, which are available. So a couple of resources, they're the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grants funds available from the Department of Energy. There's EPA Community Change Grants. Some utilities have funds for this, and there are other local flexible transportation dollars. So if you're interested in learning more about how to center Justice 40 in historically underserved communities in your future applications, please get in touch with us or the EC. And I think Matt now is going to give an overview of some of the additional resources that we can offer, including online learning platforms, in-person workshops, best practice papers, and a lot of other things. So over to you, Matt.
Yeah, this is definitely the fun part of it, because when we put out the registration for the webinar, we actually had a number of partners reach out saying, hey, can you be sure to highlight this workshop, this webinar, this event? And the good news is, yes, we had you covered, but I appreciated folks reaching out. As to Kat's point, there are so many wealth of resources here and teams. It's not just EC and Fourth, it is many partners here, many of whom really see a priority for opening up this level of technical assistance and support in developing projects with partners. So we have anything but limitations here. And that's to say this is only a snapshot of a couple core elements, especially stuff that speaks to nationwide. There are many other local and regional partners, such as Clean City Coalitions and other partner organizations that are great to connect with. Really excited to work with partners. So if anything, consider this the spark and example of some of those things in action. First up, the Local Infrastructure Hub boot camps. Local Infrastructure Hub launched about halfway through last year as a joint effort between National League of Cities and a number of funders to really highlight and elevate access to bipartisan infrastructure law funded programs such as CFI, as well as many other grant programs with a specific target for working with and supporting small and medium-sized cities. The good news is the late winter, early spring boot camps are open for registration. However, that registration does close today. So if you are even vaguely interested, I would totally encourage you to go check out their website, sign up. We will be running the boot camp for CFI Round 2, the EC, but, as well as helping out with some, there's an elective pay boot camp, but there's many other grants that are also covered in the slot of boot camps. To Kat's point, of thinking about other projects or programs where either charging or even other projects could be fitting into. So it is well worth your time for checking it out. It is all free to participate, and ultimately runs a 6 to 8 week boot camp delivery, going through key themes and elements. If you want some proof in the pudding, there were some CFI grant applications we worked with that were first started in local infrastructure hubs. So there's definitely a pathway to success for successful award there, and a great way to get your gears going. Next up, back to our friends over at Fourth. They have a series of workshops that are focused on design and fund equitable electric transportation. So 2 upcoming workshops, one coming in March in Washington, D.C., where we're actually based as EC, and then the second in April 17th in Chicago. So focusing on those good, easy to access regional hubs that are only a quick plane flight or drive away. Registration is now open for both. Can't emphasize enough, it's phenomenal in-person engagement, a really great way to huddle together, not only with subject matter experts like EC and Fourth, but also fellow peers and other municipalities, public authorities, private partners, the likes, that are also dwelling on the same questions. And it's really a great coming together. I had the pleasure to join and help facilitate a little bit of one of these workshops last year during the Roadmaps conference, and can't emphasize it enough. It's amazing to really be sure to tune into. Also on the Forest side, there's a number of resources and tools that Fourth is also sure to be pushing out. 2 that I would really call attention to, alongside just a lot of great reports, which many of us are really trying to focus on what are the digestible key takeaways we need to be sure we're catching in white paper form or something that can be a report element. The Roadmaps conference is September 24th to 26th in Detroit. So that's a change up from its usual Portland location. I'm personally excited for that because I'm based out of Columbus, Ohio. So that's only a car drive away for me. But can't emphasize that enough. It's a phenomenal conference, really speaks to the intersection of equitable transportation, EV deployment, as well as a lot of great multimodal elements too. So it is all in a phenomenal transportation nerd conference. I say with complete love of just a lot of the subject matter expert there, and can't emphasize enough to be sure to get there. Another thing also to call attention to is the relatively new EV charging education portal that Fourth also has launched. It's a really cool new platform, well worth checking out. Has really helpful technical support and guidance content, especially to centering equity and some of the core elements that Kat was speaking to. And what's also great too is it's available on demand, so that you can really take at it on your own pace, be able to work through it with your respective team and others. So while others of these things are more time limited, have specific in-person engagement, EV charging educational portal is great for those that might not be able to commit to the immediate timing or just need more flexibility. All right, and let's see, next up, our friends over at the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, which if you're not familiar with USDN, especially for our municipal partners in the room, would absolutely encourage you to check it out. It is a phenomenal peer group that has been around for many years, really focuses on that peer-to-peer exchange and learning, and really being sure that it's cities driving the conversation. Us subject matter experts are brought in to support the projects. At the end of the day, really being sure cities are clearly articulating what their barriers are, general needs, and also where they need support. So there are 2 specific things that our friends over at USDN are making available. So one is the federal funding technical assistance program. It's definitely available for members, and they're looking at some other ways to work with other local governments. It's basically a great way to really be sure you're navigating all respective BIL and federal funds and being able to access tools and resources needed for that. So definitely worth checking out, especially for many other programs outside of the EV and charging sphere. And there is also a federal funding workshop also coming up that is going off at March 7th. So again, there's a lot of close timings here over the next couple of months. So definitely worth taking a look at your calendar, seeing what works in your side of it. They have an email address that you can message for more information and getting signed up, but so too really focus on driving access to federal funding workshop. And to all these examples of workshops, one thing I really encourage attendees just to add a little bit of editorial and as a subject matter expert to let and curated that, where we do see honest success and failure. There can be failure if you're coming in with expectation that you can just hand all of it off to someone who will magically make an application appear. And where there is absolute success is those that do understand, the local context, the local things that are going to be needed for that delivery. It's not to say that there's not elements of that can be offloaded, but it's really having an attitude of, we are here to support you and really help drive that. And the best success really comes when it's the local partners that are really crafting and driving the narrative. So if anything, it definitely understand when there's that bandwidth constraint in others. But as we're trying to really point to throughout this hour, there's so many great ways you can look at those partnerings and arrangements to really find a pathway to success. And then finally, to wrap it out, on the EC side, we also have a number of other great tools and resources, similar to what's available on Forth's focus. The one thing that we absolutely encourage and point folks to at all times is our EV funding finder. The QR code is there, as well as a web address. So there are many BIL and IRA navigation tools. This is ours, specifically dedicated to EV and charging elements. We designed it as a little bit of a choose your own adventure. So the immediate landing page is, what type of entity are you? And that's everything from a nonprofit to a school, tribal nation, municipality, et cetera. And then what type of projects are you looking at? And by selecting and deselecting the key elements, we're able to get you the customized list of specific programs that you'd be eligible for, along with competitive read-in and links to additional resources. So if anything, we always recommend folks check that out, especially if you're trying to get a little bit more of a 360 analysis on other types of programs that might be up your alley. We quickly mentioned, for instance, EECVG, which is just another one of those BIL programs that is a massive breadth and depth to the level of programming that's doing, but it is ultimately another NOFO, another thing to be reading up on. So we try to really focus our tools to help with that process. Any other tool questions or other things, we also have an infrastructure@electrification.org email address. You're always more than welcome to drop us a line. We'll connect you with respective team members to get you where you need to be going on specific questions. And with that, this is all of our respective contacts. Again, we have a lot of links we're throwing out here, so more than happy to follow up with folks respectively to be sure we're getting you all key elements. But I'll throw back to Alyssa, and I believe we'll open up to some Q&A.
Absolutely right, Matt. So now we're going to head into our Q&A portion, but that was great, highlighting some of the first steps that you can take. So if you're thinking, what do I do now? Definitely get plugged in for those events. We have about 15 minutes for Q&A, and we've got a ton of questions coming in, all really great questions. We're going to start with the ones that we can definitely answer for you today, but rest assured, we're keeping record of all your questions, and we hope to bring it to the Joint Office's attention as the second round NOFO starts to take shape. So if you're wondering it, chances are other people are also wondering the same questions, and who knows, you may end up in the 2024 version of the FHWA's FAQ document. So definitely passing those questions along. Going right into it, the first question that we had come up were there any winning applications that submitted multiple applications?
Yes, North Central Texas Council of Government did receive multiple application awards. And we do know of a number of applicants who did either submit multiple applications or multiple applications were submitted for respective region. For instance, a Council of Government and the municipality submitted. So a lot of different strategies we saw employed there. If anything, that's a lot of work. So not to pull a punch there, but we did see a number of awards that way. We also did see a number of applications. There was clear language in the NOFO that projects could be essentially counter-negotiated or given partial award for awarded application. So for instance, we saw some projects that were only awarded the level 2 charging of the application, but not the DC fast charging. There also was wording as well on possibly asking projects to merge. We haven't really gotten a sense of how much of that actually came to pass, but definitely some moving sand to how that can come together.
Great. Yeah, for sure. And keeping Matt's attention while we have him. There was a question that came in about the definition of zero cities on that graph that you had shown. What does that mean when we say zero cities as a group that was applying? What does that represent? And just for everyone's knowledge, we'll share out those graphs after the fact. So when you get this information about zero cities, you can look at it again. So go ahead, Matt.
Yes, good question. So zero cities meant that it was not a city that was the named prime applicant. So county, public agency, state, essentially, and so it was both that as the priming, and also cities were not named in the project description. Now that is to say cities could most likely still be party to it, such as having a site that was included, but essentially that's just measuring any awarded project descriptions that did not expressly name or clearly indicate that cities were a core subrecipient or partner to the application.
Great clarification. Thank you. Super helpful. Another question we have in terms of something we presented on, we talked about going back to the 2023 NOFO to have those guiding pillars for your 2024 application. Where can folks find the 2023 NOFO?
I'll take it. Yeah, if it definitely should be on grants.gov. If it is not on grants.gov, we have it. We saved it probably 6 or 7 times within our organization. I'm sure Fort did it as well. And so we will include that in our post attendance email so that you can have it and you can take a look at it right away.
Yeah, and you can still find it. I took a poke at it actually yesterday, Brandt. So we'll send it to you, and you also can find it in related documents section at the tab over if you go and look at that particular funding opportunity.
Awesome. Super important. We show you guys, we lead you guys in the right direction. So we'll be sure to do that. This question can be posed to the group at large, anybody who has any insight on this. Were there any obvious trends for unsuccessful applicants?
I'll start off. So a part of the eligible project costs, that could have been electrification, which is obviously what we are prioritizing, but you could also have had hydrogen applications as well as natural or CNG and propane. We did not see any CNG or propane applications get awarded. So it was pretty obvious that we are now focusing more on hydrogen and electrification. It does make sense that we saw some more hydrogen, as Kat alluded to. In NEVI, we're not seeing medium and heavy duty being granted as much leniency as we did in CFI. And so with CFI, medium and heavy duty, hydrogen applications do make sense. I think Matt talked about the North Central Texas COG getting 2 applications. One of them was a hydrogen one. It was a fairly large sum of money that they received in addition to the electrification that they're doing under a different award as well.
Great. Yeah, definitely something to keep an eye out for. Anybody else saw any other unsuccessful applicant trends or just flags you wanted to, not necessarily that you observed, but something you could foresee being JO shying away from in round 2 or anything like that?
I'll give it a stab. And Kat and I have talked a lot on the phone on comparing notes on applicants or just, key takeaways. I guess 2 general thoughts to this. We did see a number of applications that, for lack of a better term, the applicants were limiting their approach. So stuff to the effect of, oh, we're only going to look to the west side of town, or we're only going to look at these specific partners, or essentially limitations that while they can be real, that also can actually speak to the efficacy and the perceived competitiveness as the Federal Highway Administration is scoring the project. While you might have clear intel or insight to why specific parts of your region weren't included, that might not be apparent to those that were awarding. And I'd actually probably lead that into like a second takeaway. There are many project approach that were allowed in CFI, as you saw in like the very first pie chart that we threw up. There's a lot of ways to slice and dice that, which is really exciting. It really speaks to so many different types of approach you can do. However, we also saw folks maybe get a little bit distracted, a little bit too much mission creep setting in, where you start to try to not just focus on 1 or 2 things, but like half of it. And not to be dismissive, maybe you actually have a genuine approach there, but really being sure that you're giving yourself a little bit of discipline to be sure you're fully baking each of those approaches, rather than try to cobble together, key elements to that. So there were a lot of shiny things in that NOFO, and that probably gave a little bit of distraction to folks on exactly where to focus and prioritize.
Great
Yeah, and
point.
just to reiterate, I think what Brandt said up front, really knowing where those locations are seem to be an advantage, right? So again, start now, think about where they are, work in big groups. Don't try to go it alone is probably a takeaway there on the flip side. So I definitely underscored what Brandt had offered earlier in the conversation.
Great. Yeah, definitely the identification of sites as we talked about before. We had a question come in similar to that. Do we have any thoughts on the success of applications based on how construction ready they were? We talked about IDing your sites and things like that. Do we have any kind of thoughts on if they were ready to start installing, how that could make your application more attractive?
I'll chime in first, and Kat, I guess curious to the folks that you were working with too. I wouldn't say shovel-ready projects was necessarily the key to success, but being really clear and articulate and speaking with confidence to what is your construction timeline. So that's to say, it doesn't have to be like the hole is dug, everything is ready, we just need the money to get the charger into the ground, but really being clear and concise to how you would go through efficiently and swiftly through the construction process. For lack of a better term, thinking about, okay, award announcement goes out, which it just went out. How do we quickly and carefully and all the due diligence move from there to chargers in the ground or stakeholder engagement launched? How do we do that as quickly and succinctly as possible?
Absolutely. Great point. We have another clarification question come in that I think will be super important to highlight. We can only speak to the definition of community awards in terms of the 2023 NOFO, but I have a feeling this won't change too much going into 2024. So the question was, for community awards, are both public EV stations and chargers for government fleet vehicles eligible for funding?
I'll take it again. They both should be eligible. There was a fleet charging component that was eligible. We are interested, especially as we just get to learn more from the project beyond just the award listing that was posted to FHWA, to really get to know some of the key projects that were awarded. That is to say, to the collective point here, while allowable, just the same way there's on-site renewable energy generation, medium and heavy duty charging, maybe don't focus on that as the core driver to the approach. Really be sure you're also delivering publicly accessible and community accessible charging, which is the spirit and drive of the program too. A good example actually to that, and stuff outside of CFI, but just as example, we have worked with some partners who have charging hubs, especially in downtown areas, which are indeed, there's a dedicated fleet charging section and then a public section. So even thinking about what that co-mix charging and cohabitation can look like too, if that's helpful for visualizing that.
And I can add a bit more breadth to that. Whenever we're looking through the CFI NOFO, I know one of the big questions that we had in 2023 was, does the infrastructure have to be open 24/7? And so this was something that they identified in the question and answer from 2023. If you're going the corridor route and you're putting it next to an alternative fuel corridor, it does need to be 24/7. It does need to follow the Title 23 guidelines, because the intent is to serve the alternative fuel corridor. If it's a DC fast charger in a community area and it's not intended to serve an alternative fuel corridor, then there was a little bit more leniency. The recommendation was to make it open at least for office hours, work hours or office hours. And then there's a potential path for your private fleet to use that on those non-office hours that you have. Again, that's something that you have to think about whenever you're writing your application. The more it's publicly available, the stronger argument it is for that particular location to be considered in your going forward.
Yeah, and I think that also really extends again to who's benefiting from the technology, right? And how are you thinking about that from a broader perspective than just, hey, the technology's in the ground, but who's actually able to access it? And how are we expanding equitable access to the technology?
Great. Thank you all for your insight on that clarification. That should help folks apply for the next round for sure, especially if they're involved with those government fleets. Also, we had a question come in, can organizations that have already been awarded apply again for other eligible projects in the next round?
I believe so, and I'll look to Kat and Brandt to quickly correct me too. We actually have noticed, while in years past and indeed federal programs past, there's a curing period or essentially have to sit out around. We actually have noticed that language in general less and less in programs, which is really encouraging. Definitely allows for folks to indeed think about how you can go back in on an additional award, or maybe even it's a peer municipality or other part of your region going back into.
Yep, and it's definitely it's nothing that I saw in the 2023 NOFO. Again, the 2024 NOFO is not out, but it may come into play in 2024 that they explicitly say what award winners from past can do and cannot do in terms of applying for a second round of funding.
Yeah, and I mean,
Yeah,
go ahead, Matt.
Oh, go for it, Kat.
We have an historic investment in TE too right now, right? And if you're one of the folks that got one, as Matt and Brandt alluded to up front, a lot of these regional applications were really compelling, right? So maybe partner up with a nearby city or municipality, share the learnings, and so that's more folks getting access to this historic investment, especially for the charging funding.
Yeah, if you want to do what we're going to do when the NOFO drops for the next round of CFI, you download the Word doc and then you do a tracked control comparison to the previous year's NOFO. And that's a really helpful way to indeed identify any key changes to the programming. The good news on that not allowing previous award applicants, they'll spell that out clearly in the section too. But if you want to track along with us when it drops, that's what we'll do, especially to identify any other key program changes to the next round.
And I can also assure you that we'll be doing our due diligence and making that widely available when the 2024 NOFO does come out. We will be doing exactly that and then synthesizing that information so that it's very easy for you to comprehend what is in the 2024 document that wasn't in the 2023.
Great, thank you all. Keeping an eye on the time, we have time for about one more question. And a question came in that we can perfectly queue up to once again reiterate how both Fourth and EC are here for technical assistance. We had someone ask, is there a formal request or application to receive that technical assistance from Fourth or the EC? So to shed light on that, if all of you guys would like to talk about the process for asking for that technical assistance.
Sure, I can take it from the Fourth side really quickly and then pass it over to our friends at the EC. We do have an intake form available on our website, specifically for communities that are interested in receiving technical assistance for CFI and for all the other funding opportunities that are out there. So that's one way. Another way, if you're don't want to hit the website, my email is definitely in these charts. So please get in touch with us that way as well. But we'll definitely give a plug for our website as a way for intake. And then we'll have a conversation about what your needs are, what you're looking to do from program design perspective, and what's the level of support you need. Is it from, hey, how much do these things really cost, to what do I need to think about with permitting and working with site hosts, to maybe we can help you author sections of the proposal that will help it make it more compelling. So yeah, just get in touch and we'll have a full conversation with you about what you need.
Yeah, and same from our side too. The infrastructure at electrificationcoalition.org email address is probably the best thing to drop us a line at, as we do have a general triage on the back end to be sure we're getting it respectively tracked. To Kat's point, even if it's the simple question about are there Buy America waiver requirements, things like that, we're more than happy to just be a quick resource, even for that quick one-off question. But so too, yeah, more than happy to really, if you're feeling flat-footed on a specific section, things to that effect, more than happy to tag up wherever that need is. Again, I'll also gladly go back and plug and promote the workshops. That's also where we dedicate a lot of our staff time to. So while we do use that as a catch-all, we also are really present in those workshops. it's a really great forum to also be sure we're able to dial in and work directly with you too. So I'd gladly, you don't just have to come on to EC and Forth's turf respectively. Well, we're out in the middle of it, and happy to meet out there too.
Great, and we will share those emails in the chat as well as in the follow-up, so you can definitely get synced up with us. But unfortunately, that is all the time we had today, as we are at the 3 o'clock mark. But we wanted to thank you for attending, thank our speakers for their expertise and answering questions. And we are excited for these awards, the continuation of the CFI program, and watching implementation of these stations happen. So be sure to stick around for our post-show slides, where you'll see more about our next webinar, as well as upcoming events. And just a reminder that all information will be circulated in an email following up. So thank you so much for your attention, everybody.